Hi everyone, I'm Eugenia Bertulis, and I co-lead the Interaction Design program at Emily Carr University. And this is a panel of people who've really inspired me in our work at Emily Carr, bringing VR and mixed reality and AR into the curriculum. And I do want to apologize. A. Thomas Goldberg here is the leader of Pepper's Ghosts Art Collective, and he is on this panel, hasn't been announced. We sent the wrong information in. And Haig, Armen, my co-leader, is at convocation today, so he's not able to join us. But so I'll start, as the first question is to ask my inspirational panel here to tell me about the work that you do in art and design research and VR, and how that might be different in an academic or art or design research context from a consumer VR professional world. Go ahead, A. Thomas, thank you.
Sure. So that's a good question, because I actually sort of lead a bit of a double life. Most of my day job, I work as I have a consulting company called Lifelike Unbelievable Animation Design. And I've done work for Oculus and Microsoft and Epic Games and a number of others. And coming out of many, many years of working in the professional video games industry. But I actually started my career as a designer in theater. And now, after sort of many years and getting to a point where I have a little bit more control over my time, I've returned to that. And that's part of what Pepper's Ghost, which was originated about 3 years ago, was sort of about. It's kind of exploring that, taking a lot of the things that I've learned on the industry side and sort of applying that to kind of my other love for live performance. And so the work that I've been doing along with Maria and others with Pepper's Ghost has been about really looking at sort of mixed reality and virtual reality and AR in the context of live performance and in the context of sort of working with live performers in front of an audience and the sort of opportunities and challenges that go along with that.
Thanks. Bernhard, what are you doing with VR?
Basically, I'm using it as a research tool, also as in teaching. So as a research tool, and I guess one of the main difference there is, I don't have to make money with it. So initially I started using virtual reality as a tool to run experiments, to study humans, so really running perceptual behavioral experiments and using it as a way to create a relatively naturalistic environment that you could not otherwise do. Outside in the real world, you cannot really run experiments easily enough because you have limited stimulus control and repeatability and so on. And now increasingly, especially given that the technology is getting better and a bit more affordable, we also think about how can we use virtual reality to do something that we couldn't otherwise experience. So can we use it for something positive? I mean, there's so many applications where I wonder whether that's really going to help the planet. So we're trying to, for example, see whether we could use immersive virtual reality to give people the experience that astronauts had that was really deeply moving for them, and see whether it can give people a glimpse of that without having to shoot them out into space. For those who have been there at the initial keynote, I mean, talking to her afterwards, some people who experienced virtual reality of space actually started crying in the simulation because it was so moving. And so we want to see, okay, can we really use virtual reality for a positive purpose and really give them that experience? In terms of teaching, I'm teaching a course on immersive environments where I use virtual reality, both the immersion as theoretical frameworks, trying to understand what it really is, how it is different from different media, and then at the same time, in terms of groups, similar to what you guys do, I believe, and what you've heard in the previous panel, to really teach them using Unity or whatever game engine we want to use at the time to really do projects and do something interesting there.
Thanks, Bernie. Maria, can you introduce yourself and talk about how you're using virtual reality in your art and research practice?
Sure. So I work at Emily Carr University of Art and Design, so really specific domain. The kinds of students that we get are obviously interested in the aesthetic experience within VR and the interaction within VR. My own research is about social spaces in VR and how to get people to move. So, and this can be, well, the work that we've done with Pepper's Ghost about digital performance, like digital puppetry, dance, or it can be about the current work that I'm working on, which is called I Am Afraid, which is about creating basically a concrete poetry slam in virtual space. And so you are kind of creating words and manipulating them as sculptural elements, but also as instruments. And again, it's this trying to bring a critical eye to the kind of content that we want to see in VR. And I believe that in terms of what the world needs, being very critical and thinking, you know, what kind of world we want and how to get back into our bodies, I think is one very critical component of that. So yeah, that's basically what I do. I work a lot with Unity and Unreal, all kinds of different tools. None of it's easy, all of it's fun.
Thanks, Mia. Ryan.
All right. So I'm pretty interested in boring problems, solved in maybe interesting ways. I've written a little bit about practical VR design. So, you know, I think that there are a lot of folks out there that are pursuing it as an entertainment medium, as a creative medium. I like to think about it as a very boring kind of humdrum sketching tool, right? So a lot of the things that I've been focused on are what are ways that you can make the process of sketching in this volumetric space a little bit more accessible to people who may be interested in making a virtual reality or a mixed reality experience, but also maybe they're interested in redecorating their living room, or they are interested in, I think, trying to perceive what the actual scale of a blue whale is. Or maybe they just think that they would have an easier time doing their taxes if they could lay information out in a more spatial way, right? There's a lot of really boring problems that I think if you had easy, graspable methods at your disposal to manipulate things in a volumetric space, you could come up with more novel solutions to. So that's really been my focus.
Thanks, Ryan. So that leads in, I think, one of the things in particular when I saw the performance at Fringe Fest that A. Thomas and Maria did, you talked about that the work that you're trying to do is getting to quicker, sketchier types of prototyping tools. Can each of you talk about what the prototyping tools are that you're using for people who might think that you need 6 weeks or 6 months of training on Unity to get into VR? Like, what are the ways that you're working with your collaborators and your students to quickly get people prototyping agile in VR spaces? Thanks.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I think that especially in the work that we've been doing, one of the critical things is really being able to kind of get in and be working right away. Especially when you're working with live performance, so much of what you're doing is discovered in process. And so you can't kind of like spend a year building everything, bring it in, put it on stage with the performers and expect anything good to come out of it, because within the first half an hour, it's gonna be like, well, you know what, this isn't actually working. And, you know, but at the same time, you know, we're trying to create aesthetic experiences that are sort of, you know, with high, you know, production values, and you know, and so it, you know, it's critical for us to be able to kind of get those decisions, you know, sort of early. And so we like to get the performers in almost on day one, and to be able to, you know, a lot of what we do involves tracking performers and tracking objects that the performers, so it's all dance and puppetry. And so just having this sort of toolbox of like sort of proxy objects and environments and tools that we've built. I've been working primarily on Unreal, but we've done work in Unity as well. But you know, just tools that enable us to do that, and sort of kind of build that foundation in advance. And so we can be making these decisions on kind of very lo-fi, you know, objects and environments, but then know that when we're going to go like later on and spend a month building an environment, we've already figured out that it works and what works and what doesn't work.
Well, I mean, to be honest, I think I'm still looking for good tools to do rapid prototyping in virtual reality for the kind of things we do. I mean, you can do sketching and so on, 3D modeling fairly quickly, but to build an actual experience still takes a lot of time. So what we do use a lot is like outside of VR, like rapid iteration tools. Well, the usual thing you use in design and sketching and whatever, lots of post-it notes and things like that. So, but yeah, maybe you know more.
So yeah, it can be fairly easy to get something going in VR with Unity, and there's lots of tools out there. But when you get into more complex environments, multiplayer or tracked with motion capture, tracked objects, then it gets, and augmented reality, maybe you've got a screen that's being followed, and so windows, and like all of it can be quite complex at some point. So then it becomes about building custom tools, as Thomas was talking about. It's like, okay, we at least need something so that we can get an object into being mocapped and into the virtual world in, say, 20 minutes or less. So, and it doesn't matter if it's mapped to an object that's not quite the object you'll want in the end. It's just, at least there's something. And in terms of, I basically iterate a lot. So I use tools. Some of the tools that we've built in the lab are about digital puppetry. Some of the tools that I'm currently using, HoloJam is a tool that, an SDK that was developed at NYU. So I've just started using that because it's stable enough now. And it's pretty good, like in terms of being able to network objects and players together and have all of that information synchronized between headsets. And I should say that I'm using mostly phone headsets. So right now using Pixels. I've also used Gear VRs. So HoloJam's a good one. And then the tool set that we've done, even though it's not quite open source, but it's definitely can be used. And then some tools that he's developed using A-Frame, so I'll pass it on maybe.
Sure, all right.
Yeah.
So I think like when it comes to exploring ideas in VR, there's sort of like, okay, what is my idea even to begin with? Then sort of how do I think it is going to work? And then what is actually technically feasible within this realm to put together, given the parameters we have and the equipment that is available to us. And I think like when it comes to what is even my idea, I spent a lot of time on paper there, and so one of the tools that or one of the workflows that I've been trying to work on lately is like, how fast can I make the process of sketching something on paper, then snapping a photo of it, wrapping it on the inside of a sphere, and looking around, and maybe beginning to place some hotspots here and simulate navigating from one state of my app to the next. There's a lot of stuff that you can do to that end with A-Frame, right? And so I have this process that I call Sketchy VR, which is really just meant to, if you know how to use a paper and pencil and a smartphone camera, and you have a cardboard headset, you can get started really quickly. Then when it comes to kind of how do you think that this thing should work, I think that you want more maturity in your tools. And there was in the panel, or the two gentlemen that were speaking before, right? They were talking a lot about these tools like Modbox, and we're sort of in the early stages of what appears to be like a Cambrian explosion of different ways to prototype in VR for all sorts of different grades of hardware. But democratizing access to these sketching tools, I think, is the most valuable thing to focus on for any team that you're working with, right? If suddenly the only people who can think and express an idea about VR are the ones who know how to wrangle Unity or Unreal, you've cut off access to maybe some of the better ideas in the group, right? So.
Yeah, so that leads into the sort of next topic, which is, I think, one of the roles of art and design research at a university is around thinking critically about where these tools are going. So I ask each of you, how is your work, how is your research helping you enable your students, your collaborators, to think critically about VR?
That's a good question. So, I think the big thing is about getting everybody involved in the process, really. and involving people who may not, sort of at the end of the day be responsible, say, for the virtual elements or the visual elements, involved in the thinking process and the design process and the decision process. So whether they're dancers or puppeteers or jugglers or other performers, having them sort of directly involved in part of that conversation, both because it expands sort of their view of what's there and what's possible, but also forces us to think critically about aspects of the work we're doing that we may not have otherwise because we're not coming from it from that perspective or for that approach, which then ultimately everybody learns from it, and the process evolves as a result of that. So that's, I think.
But we had the conversation with the earlier panel about a 6-year-old at a trade show putting on a headset. How do we learn about whether or not, how would you have somebody at a performance, how would you figure out whether or not that's an appropriate age or not in your artwork, right? I mean, these aren't easy questions, but this is our role to address them.
And I mean, it's fortunately, that's a question I haven't had to directly deal with, just by the nature of the work that I've been doing, and part of it is because I am kind of cognizant of that. But I think there are sort of critical questions there, and I think critical broader questions in terms of how the work we do sort of fits into people's lives and into the world in general. When we're creating the potential for whether people talking an earlier panel, when it becomes glasses and then contact lenses, and we have an accessibility to virtual environments that same accessibility we have to our phones. How do we, both as people creating content and trying to think sort of critically about it, and and us as consumers, what role do we want that to play in our lives? When we sort of take the sort of natural constraints, the constraint of the stuff that operates on my phone is that I have to take out my phone and put it on. When we start taking away those constraints, then we have to decide for ourselves what those constraints are. So.
Bernhard.
In terms of critical thinking, I mean, in teaching, I mean, one part is just to triggering the reflection and asking people to really explain why they do it, how they do it, and really starting that argument. In terms of projects I allow them to do, I mean, there's certain ones I just simply don't allow. It's like, sorry, there's already enough ego shooters out there. We're not going to do one, no porn, nothing non-ethical. And often I give them a design challenge and to really try to get them to think about how you could use virtual reality in a way that might go beyond the other mediums, because it is more immersive and interactive, for example. So, for example, we ask them to create something that creates some kind of meaningful experience of empathy or connection with other people or animals or plants or whatever it is.
With the planet.
With the planet, yeah. Well, that's what we are doing as a research project now as well, to really see, I mean, if virtual reality is really the tool that encapsulates all the other ones, in the sense that you can simulate reading a book or watching a movie or driving a car in virtual reality, but you couldn't simulate virtual reality in a movie, then it should allow us to really give experiences that you couldn't otherwise have. But that also gives you a lot of responsibility. So there's so many things that if you shouldn't do them in reality, maybe you shouldn't do them in virtual reality. So I'm very critical of for example, some of the immersive journalism. Like, if people are in like a war experience and get traumatized there, I certainly do not want an immersive or real experience of that, because I don't want to traumatize anybody with that. So I think there's a lot of discussion that is yet to be had in terms of how to ethically really create content, and I don't think we have even started that conversation. And I'm not just talking about motion sickness, but it's really, if it really fulfills the idea of virtual reality as an experience that is so real that you can have similar experiences in there, then you need to be very, very cautious. And I think I always think we would need some kind of certification of VR content before you really bring it to the media, because it is easy to traumatize somebody in VR. I mean, mildly, but even to a more extended experience. So I think that's a conversation I'd love to have more.
It's such a massive question. I'm going to answer it, I think, from two perspectives. One is the very personal perspective of, I think we're at a time, currently in the world where joy has become a radical act, in the sense of, being able to really truly be here for whatever happens next, which is, some of it is disturbing at this point and may become more disturbing in the future. So I think part of the work that I do is about people rediscovering joy in being. And then there's the other part, which is how do we, once we have rediscovered that joy of being in the world, how do we look to change or be influencing the development of technology for the world that we want? So, and I'm not just talking about the content that we're producing in VR, and I've seen delightful and really disturbing content, but I'm talking like, 5-10 years down the road, when we don't really have that much choice about being immersed in virtual layers. I mean, right now we can choose yes or no to take out our phones. I think in the future that choice will be less and less. So then we really need to be part of that development. What kind of content do we want to see? What happens to advertising? What happened to privacy? Like all of those questions are about us, are about the government, are about the companies that we deal with. Really important questions that our students need to be thinking about and our teachers need to be talking about. So yeah, I think that those are to open a little tiny pipe into a massive box.
Yeah, what they said. No, it is a massive question, right? I mean, I think I get concerned often that there's this sort of manifest destiny approach to, what do we have to do to make VR be a successful, impactful thing in the world? Like there's this devout obsession with the, birthing of the metaverse as this, final form of maybe Mark Andreessen's prediction that software was going to eat the world. Like we'll have eaten it at that point, and that'll be, in some people's minds, I think, a better place. But, I don't think we should be so forceful necessarily to push it that direction. If it's valuable and useful, it should find its own path to that end. And so when we've been working with students, a lot of the time, I mentioned there's the what is my idea, kind of how do I imagine it's going to work, and then what's possible. But okay, why is this something that should be made to begin with, or maybe more importantly, why is this something that has more value in virtual reality or in mixed reality? Is a question that when you get kind of feverishly focused on the medium itself, you can sometimes become blind to. So. Yeah, there's huge benefits we know to the tech, but to this point of it can be used as a treatment tool maybe for PTSD. Well, yeah, what does happen if you throw someone into a war zone? Is it not, if it's powerful enough to treat it, could it not incidentally, accidentally produce that trauma in somebody? These are delicate concerns, and we don't really have most people are still at the point in tinkering with VR where you're not even sure how to think about what you might be able to do or how to do it well, let alone whether or not you should start doing it in the first place. And if you spend too much time questioning whether you should do it, then you never really get those skills, vice versa. So I guess it's a balance.
21 years ago, I was working on my first VR project. I was at New York University at the time, and I made this joke that the reason why I was interested is because I wanted to create worlds that were so compelling that everybody would go and they would just do this virtual world, and then I could go to Central Park and have it all to myself. And 20 years later, the joke's not as funny as it was.
Or you might get to Central Park and be surrounded.
Like, we're, in many ways, if that's the direction we're heading, then, as I said, it's not as funny if it's true.
Exactly.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been really inspired by the conversations we've been having about Monika Bielskaite too, and this idea that VR is a possibility space. And so instead of everybody going tech-free, like how are we anticipating what's happening in the future of VR and creating that in the context of art and design? I think there's a few minutes left, and maybe it would be a time to see if there's any questions from the audience on this.
No.
Kind of on prototyping. I'm a designer, and I think there's always been like a clear line between design and development, as far as like mobile or desktop applications go. It's like, make this pretty thing, I want it to work like this, and you hand it off, and they'll go build it.
Right.
But I think because we're limited on the tools we can design with and prototype with as designers. We're prototyping in the tools they're going to be building the product in. So I'm kind of wondering how you guys communicate that process to your students. Like, well, if you make a prototype, really high fidelity, and it looks really good, is there like a development mindset that you're kind of translating to your students? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I say like the question, so there's a lot of questions I think around that handoff process, and then also the design process in general. I mean, it's hard enough at the moment, even with like, flat rectangular apps that we make, let alone once you add a third dimension. The tool chain is pretty well evolved if you're going to make web apps, or if you're going to make smartphone apps or desktop apps. The tool chain is non-existent if you're going to make volumetric apps, right? Like, to your point, you can prototype in the tools that you'll build the final thing in, which means, one, whoever's responsible for the design of the experience has to become more literate than they're comfortable being with how that gets executed. And so the thing kind of just de facto has to be a conversation the whole time, more so than it does currently. I mean, theoretically, this stuff should always be a conversation where all stakeholders are involved, so that you don't make promises you can't keep about what is possible to build, right? But yeah, it's a mammoth challenge with the tool chains that are available. Unity seems to be getting a lot better, actually. It's closer to real time now to have an idea and then test it. And that's what I always liked about A-Frame or WebVR in general, is that because that is effectively the default state of making things on the web. Like, you make a change, hit refresh, it's there. That kind of speed of thought is the thing that's the most critical, right?
Was your question geared towards industrial design or geared towards design for virtual environments, or both?
Yeah, the latter.
Okay. Because I think, there's a lot of in-world development tools that are starting to come out, and none of them are quite comfortable yet.
There's one that I still haven't gotten a chance to try, but I think I'm maybe going to get the name wrong. Sketchbox? I think it's called Sketchbox, and I think it's made by some folks in Toronto. But it looks more fluid for miming or doing a puppeted version of what the experience should be like in the end, shot from the headset's point of view. So, I can build this world from a palette, and then I can go through and record my experience of doing simple interactions with the objects in the world. Beats mocking stuff up in After Effects, right? Yeah, that's slow and not accurate.
Time for one more question.
There's a tool I think we're checking out from Artifact in Seattle. It's called
Storyboard.
Storyboards.
Yeah.
I haven't checked that out yet, but it seems like a really cool way to, you do like a few different sketches on their paper, and then it translates really well in the 3D environment.
That's a really good point. It's another one that I've got on my list of things. So busy, I haven't had a chance to try the tools that should make my life easier.
Because you spend so much time with the tools that don't make it easy.
Exactly, it's hard to make that switch. But yeah, they have, what's really interesting about theirs is if you watch the video of Storyboard VR's approach to paper prototyping, it's like, yeah, draw on this piece of paper. Imagine it's the sphere unwrapped to a wide, thin rectangle, and then take our other piece of paper that's got a, circle cut out of it, and hold that over the piece that you've drawn your sketch scene on. And even before you bring it into VR, you might get a better sense of what will be in the cone of focus, right? So you can start to, at the very least, you can start to vet your sketches before you bring them into VR and see if they make sense at scale, right? But yeah, that tool, hopefully it is as good as advertised.
What would your guys' ideal prototyping app look like, and what would those basic functions be? Is that too big of a question?
It depends a lot on the context, what you want to do. For example, if you want to do architecture, it'll be completely different than if you do industrial design or art or drawing, or you just want to have fun. So I think that that would be my response. Is basically it depends on the functional and non-functional requirements of the tool and of the final goal. So there's probably would have at least 20 different answers here.
Yeah, I mean, the last time I went to NYU, they showed me, I don't know if you've ever seen Ken Perlin talk about Chalk Talk, but it's a 2D thing where you can draw and it becomes animated. And they had just been able to put it in VR, and I have to say that was pretty amazing. In terms of like when people talk about killer app, and I kind of hate that term, but it really it grabbed my attention. This idea of being able to draw something that I know has a typical kind of movement. So if I draw a butterfly, I expect it to fly, and I did that, and it flew, and it was a kind of so I think the combination of creating static objects with embedded animations that are built from machine learning or AI or something, and interact with each other as well, there's something that would be completely compelling.
I mean, I guess ideally you would want to have an AI. You just tell it what you want to draw, and you give it a little bit, and some of that it just does, and so it's more like a collaborator. So you can delegate.
Yeah. Yeah, there's one small set of things that I see as missing from nearly every attempt at making that tool that exists right now, and it's like just little guides to help me adhere to the best practices that I know I should, like as far as if I'm making a VR experience, how far I want to keep these objects from each other, or like the range of comfortable motion, not for myself, but for the group of folks that I'm targeting, right? A way for me to heuristically evaluate the things that I'm putting together without having to run that test later. Almost like having a grid system underneath the 2D design to a certain degree, right? Those things I think help you from making bad decisions early on. So those would be nice.
Well, thank you guys very much. I think that's time. So I want to, there's a booth that Bernhard has downstairs for CIAD. It's
iSpace Lab.
iSpace Lab, and Emily Carr has a booth in the same block. So please come down and see some of the examples of the student work, and we'd love to hear your further questions that weren't able to come up at this. And thank you, colleagues, inspiration to me for coming and having this conversation.
Thank you.